morning, Dolly. How are you this fine gray morning here in Leipzig for me? What's it like in your neck of the woods?
And I'm in the east as usual. It is even colder and frostier, but not my heart. Because today, Rob, we talk about love.
It's a lovely subject.
So my first question is, have you been in love?
It's very interesting. I think about that question in terms of, I don't know. I mean, I guess because I question it, then I can say I have not been in love. Because I think if you know, there's that movie, A Beautiful Mind, and the question of love comes up at one point. And it's something that we don't really need to prove to ourselves. And therefore, if I have to question it, I have to wonder about it. Therefore, I have not been in love.
Okay,
You?
then I would like to start with a novel we both have been written. It is called Aegon Say Promise.
And where is it available?
It is available on Amazon. Okay, so I would like to remind our audience what it is to feel flattered and maybe to get into love.
Okay.
It is all placed in a restaurant, and she had a little meeting with a man she doesn't fancy, but she has somebody at the restaurant, a chef, who she really likes to look at.
And what's
Hannah.
the female's character? Hannah. Okay.
Hannah sensed she was on the verge of something, that the wave of the next moment would bring something even more exciting to her day. Or was it tomorrow or the day after? Yet there was that feeling. She ate quietly, and if anyone else had looked over at her, the other couples in the restaurant, they would have seen a lone woman with a sheepish smile on her lips, sensibly making her way through her meal. They wouldn't have known about her racing heart, how she could feel the pulse in both her wrists and neck. They wouldn't have guessed that a slight blush rose to her cheeks when she thought of the unexpected kiss on her right. Could the excitement have to do with John? Was it it? She finished her free glass of wine and carved into the last piece of chicken, dipping it into the remaining burgundy sauce. The memory of the kiss that too entertained her, and yes, her novel was coming to life in her imagination. Jean-Jacques returned to take away the plate to offer a complimentary dessert, but Hannah had enough. "I'm fine, thank you. Another glass, or would you prefer some coffee?" "None, neither, I'm fine." He nodded like an anxious child, unsure if his good behavior had been noticed, uncertain if he had been forgiven. But really, there was nothing to forgive or complain about. Men are so ridiculous, Hannah thought. Now I want to tell you that a chicken, a piece of her meal, fell to the floor, and it came again to the restaurant, and it was repeated, that meal. And she only wants to see the chef. And she says to the chef, "I am the chicken on the floor." And then the chef offers her a glass of wine, but she had already enough. And she says she wanted to go to the chapel. We are on Guernsey. And he says, "I can bring you there." And this little episode there is something like they are in the car. She is excited and her heart raced, but now doubts flooded her mind. He swung the wheel to the right aggressively, Hannah noted. "It's funny, I don't know what I'm doing with you." Hannah didn't say anything, just stared straight ahead. "If I may be honest, you are the first woman on that other seat in my passenger, in this car." She could only nod at this blunt pronouncement. "I am faithful, I am, but it has been difficult. Her job is demanding and she is always tired, and we are getting nowhere. I'm sorry I shouldn't say all this." "It's all right." He breathed deeply. "With some people you can open up. I can tell right away. I feel comfortable with you, but my wife, it has been difficult. We are hardly physical anymore." Hannah wasn't sure if she heard him correctly. Intuitively, he kept talking. "For years, the The first year went by so quickly and so magically. It was very exciting. I had a cousin who studied in London, but to move to another country is different than just visiting. She had very well-connected friends who advised us on the process. The street lamps were lightning. She could make out other headlights on the road ahead. The second year was good, but distant. Last year I was nearly tempted, and this year I feel like shutting down. Hannah listened attentively, enjoying this magical, albeit vulnerable moment. She could hardly speak. Imperceptibly, she was shaking her head at the outburst of emotion inside her and the confession streaming out of him. She tried to contain herself. When they arrived at their destination, it seemed less interesting than the car ride. Yes, the church was pretty, and she took some pictures with her digital camera, but she had been here before and taken similar pictures. For a second she remembered she was still married, and that she and Matthias had stood here over 10 years ago, confessing to the idea they should have had their ceremony here instead of in Hanover. "Can I take one of you?" she now asked Hattem. He stood there where Matt had stood. "Why?" "To remember the chicken on the floor." "You want to remember that? Why not? If it wasn't for the chicken, where would we be now?" He nodded and touched his chin pensively. "True. Well then, let me take one of you when you are done." The flash flickered and she blinked in disbelief. "Here," she said, lowering the camera and passing it over to him. He held the camera up to his face, his fingers finding the right bottom. "Why do you want one of me anyway?" He smiled, then mysteriously said, "I want to capture this moment with a woman in disbelief at what is happening to her."
A woman in disbelief.
That was the extract, and the question is, why do people fall in love?
I suppose I could answer that from a philosophical standpoint, or maybe Schopenhauer would say that people fall in love simply to keep the species alive, that we need to align with each other in order to procreate. But I don't believe that. I believe more or less people fall in love, and I suppose because I'm a Platonist, that Christian Platonist, as I would put it, that people fall in love to discover not only beauty and life and light, but also God, the universe, unity. So I feel like people fall in love to express that within themselves.
I think people look for their soulmate, and I always believe that people think it is fate when they meet and when they fall in love. Immanuel Kant once said that love only is an appearance. It is only an idea. And when I ask people what effects does love have on them, they have an answer and they say, "Oh, he or she makes me feel so and so." So if somebody makes you feel so and so, you have emotions and you have the full spectrum of life. May it be illusions, promises, self-deceit, or whatever nice it is. And so you have certain attributes you connect with your love. And after you are separated, mostly people get separated at least once in life, they feel devoid. They feel devoid of all that attributes, of all that being self.
Yeah, there's this line in a song, "Colors seem to fade."
So love is the presence of life. And I think that love can come in different colors. So, for instance, even persons who are very ill and who have been ill for a long time, I, as a psychotherapist, then always ask, what is the positive aspect of that? Because they have something positive from anything, even bad things. And somehow these people also attach to their illness. They attach like little children who have abusive parents. It is amazing how they love their parents instead. So it is love across borders. It is feeling sense, feeling full, the self. So I think you need to love in life.
But wouldn't you call, for instance, I know what you're speaking about. When I was ill, I was almost infatuated with the illness, and we've spoken about this before. I mean, also the idea that there's different types of love. And if we return to the ancient Greeks, there was eros, that's the erotic love. That's where we get the word eroticism, of course. Then there's agape, which is basically love of neighbor, love of the world around us, which is basically compassion. It's how I regard it. And then there's philia, which is like love of friends. But I would tend to guess that there's also like a love of our vocation, a love of what we do. For instance, when a person is cooking a meal and they put love into it, when someone is composing a work of art, to me, that's also love. For instance, in preparation of getting ready for today, getting in the mood, so to speak, I was listening to Borodin, and he wrote this beautiful second quartet in 1881 for his wife. It was a 20th wedding anniversary gift. And the Notturno, the third movement, it just exudes that bliss of love, that sort of tender, and it's both tranquil and stormy. And that's what I feel like love is, tranquil and stormy at the same time. And love has so many contradictions to it.
May it be that this is the reason, tranquil and stormy, that we accept fights, problems, conflicts in love because we cling to the idea of being together?
That's an interesting question, actually. I guess because I haven't really been in love, I'm really straining to answer that question, to provide you an answer. But I guess if I'm going to just spitball here, I think that conflict in love has to do with two individuals that have different lifespans, different viewpoints. And the conflict is this sort of delicate but lovely tension that keeps the relationship sparking. And conflict in itself is drama. And where would drama be without love? When we think of our earlier topic about death and love, there's a book called A Song of Love and Death, and it's about opera. And opera itself, every opera that we've probably ever heard, 90%, it's either love or death. That's how it ends, a happy ending, an ending in death. Then you look at Wagner, the Liebestod, so basically love and death intermingling. I mean, the whole opera, Tristan is Old, is based on the Tristan chord, which is just basically one long tease of a chord. It's a chord that does not resolve itself until the kablooey of an ending. So conflict is there in love, because if love was so easy, then it would be boring.
Do you think that talking about life and love without quoting from famous people would be boring for me?
That's interesting, because I have a quote for that. Because the French moralist La Rochefoucauld said that, would people fall in love if they had not heard love spoken of? Is it because we have all these predecessors, we have this history? I mean, we cannot talk about love without thinking about where it's come from, our notions, our cultural notions. I mean, the Troubadours, romantic love was always about this distant lady that they could never possess. And now we've basically inherited that in many ways with our marriages. We believe that our marriages should be full of love, whereas in the past, the marriage was like, hey, you have cattle, I have land, let's meet. Let's have a relationship.
Yeah, it's funny how the sexual comes into it, because you, in my opinion, you see love from a very romantic standpoint.
I do.
And the question always is, how do you cross borders to being physical? Because
you mean from a state of, from, say, let's put it this way, you have a person,
yes,
you enjoy their company.
Mm-hmm.
It's a friendship on one level, yet there's that chemistry on another level. I think it just happens naturally. I think that there's some things, like the reasons of the heart do not have anything to do with the reasons of the mind. I mean, it's kind of absurd when you think of love, if you try to logic everything into it.
Yes, and how important is guts? I mean, that feeling I started with when reading from my novel.
I think it's 100% important.
It is, yes, yes.
If something tells you something is wrong or something is right, you listen to that. And I've been both places where I've not listened to my gut and walked into a situation that hurt me, vice versa. I mean, the whole joke is that men have a big head and a small head, and a little head guides them and guides them into the wrong directions.
Mm. Mm.
But for me, not having really loved, I mean, I had moments where it was, for instance, when I was 14 years old and I had gone to a different high school than people in my neighborhood. So I had many friends, many female friends. I felt very lucky and fortunate to have all these lovely ladies around me. But circumstances, I don't really want to talk too much about it. I actually talk about it in my podcast, From the Jaws of Lion, what happened. But I hadn't seen these people in a year. And when I got back together with them, there's one girl that a year ago I had considered a friend. And all of a sudden, she came forward in such a way that I just felt completely bewildered about how I felt. My knees trembled. My stomach was swimming because my heart was in my stomach. It just felt completely overwhelming. And I wasn't prepared for that. And I would say, well, it was that love, or was that just an inkling of love, or that was just a template for a future love? And that's what I equate with love, that feeling, that sensation of just absolute vulnerability. And you're trying to hold your life together, like holding this huge aquarium of water within yourself. And everything, it's both tide and in and out. And so I don't know.
So you have been in love?
For a day. That's what I felt like. And that day, to me, the memory of that day lingered to the point that it inspired writing of today. So, for instance, when I think about love, I think about like Dante, the famous poet, and how when he was 9 years old, he fell in love with Beatrice. But Beatrice became this representation of faith and love and kindness and all these wonderful things. In the Divine Comedy, Virgil guides Dante through the underworld, through purgatory. And then when he gets to heaven, Beatrice takes over and she becomes this epitome of faith. So to me, love creates love. Love creates works of art. And art to me is love letters to mankind.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Did you know that 6 years from the first hint of a problem in a relationship, it takes 6 years to try to find a solution?
6 years. And in what sense? Can you give me an example of this?
Yeah, because my first marriage lasted 13 years. And I think after a couple of years, I had the impression that there was something wrong. Mm-hmm. But it took me another 6 years until we separated. And I think you should very closely listen to such inklings of the heart, and course, be honest.
For instance, the relationship I did have here in Germany, it was for 1 month. It wasn't really love. There's this funny, I don't know if it's come to Germany yet, they call it snow globing, where you have an intimate relationship over the holiday season, especially December into January. And it was, I think in many ways, is because the years before and the years after, it was so much loneliness in my life. You know, when you're sick, when you go through periods of illness, it's not only being ill, but in the recovery period, it's trying to catch up with the rest of the world. And I felt like I was inspired to care for this person without really considering my own heart and my own emotions. I think I was more interested in having the accoutrements of a relationship. I remember being at a party with this girl, and I felt on the one hand that there's a sense of arrival, like, oh, I'm in a relationship, but I felt like such a fraud. I felt like I was a fake. Here I am holding the hands of this person that I don't really know that well. I've only met a week or so before, but how can I pretend to be so intimate and so connected when this person, she doesn't give me that feeling of love, that feeling that I had at 14. And another example is that when we were at a restaurant, I found myself being drawn to more women. I figured that's a good sign that if you're in a relationship and you're still drawn to other people, the person you're sitting across from, that's not the person for you.
No, it is not. Definitely not.
The person you're in love with should be the person that is for you. And you're sitting across from that person that makes you totally unaware of everyone else.
You know, I am a woman, and
really,
women tend to fall for men who are Don Juan-like. They say very nice things like, you are the only one, etc. So what I read also was that with lot of alarming sides, and it's very hard to resist for us. Because if somebody is smashed by our beauty, surprised by our soul, then we want to believe him. So we don't worry too much, we go straight for it.
There's a film called Elizabethtown, and it brings up the idea of this dream pixie girl. That's the kind of criticism around this film. There's this idealized version of a female that she's going to solve all the male problems, and she's quirky and fun at the same time. And the film has its problems. I mean, narrative-wise, plot-wise, I could go on about this film. I still enjoy it, but it's fumbling at best. But there's one moment where the character, the male character, who is basically distraught, his father's passed on, and she's meeting up with this girl, Claire, and he says to her something quite lovely, and she says to him, "I don't want an ice cream cone." And he asks, "What do you mean by an ice cream cone?" He says, "Something sweet at the moment, but melts and fades." And that's what these Don Juans do. It's all ice cream cones, flowers, chocolates, endearments, lovely, like ceremonies. They create ceremonies and moments where everything feels like everything. Oh, it's gushing with love.
You know, Germans are very sober, even in romance, and they meet, and then already in their first date they discuss their future. So how many kids do you want to have, etc. So it's very practical. It's practical love. So the absence of compliments in relationships, the absence of offering help and intense listening and being there is a problem. It can be a problem in German relationships because they never learned to be romantic. They always learned to survive.
I think that's an interesting standpoint because it's, for instance, when I first started reading German poetry, of course, I love Rilke and Hölderlin, but with them, there's the bruised elements, and there's still elements of love and other, for instance, other writers. You think of Goethe, of course, and Schiller. Though Schiller was more in love with freedom. I think that was because of his childhood. But yet, yeah, the sober side, it's quite, I feel like German flirting is just mere conversation. It almost seems very, very quiet and very dry. And I still remember one time I was in a bar and I was watching a guy it was an American guy, he was from Boston, watching from a distance, trying to engage with a German girl. And this guy had a few tattoos, not over the top, not long sleeves, but he was passing a girl sitting at a table, and it was like a long communal table, so she was amongst friends. So it was not like this was a threatening environment, and he just merely stopped. He had a drink in his hand and saying, "Oh, I really like your tattoo." I overheard this, and she said, "Oh, thank you." That was it.
You know, when I was in England, a student, and I researched on Shelley, Percy Pushy Shelley.
Yeah.
I met at a party, I met an English philosopher. Gary was his name. And he mentioned to me in the first sentences that he came from Horsham. Horsham is the place where Shelley was born.
Oh, okay.
When I heard that, I really, honestly, I dragged him on his jacket, pulled him into the corner, held close to him. He was shocked. He thought, my goodness, what does she want? And I was, of course, a head taller than him. And I immediately interviewed him. So we started, of course, it ended in a romance.
But it began very German-like interview.
That's right. I felt like Brunhilde.
Yeah, like, hey, baby, you got a bunch of questions to answer. Let's start with this.
Yes.
How do you do under pressure?
Yes.
How do you see yourself in the next 5 years? What's your shoe size?
Rob, that's not fair.
I'm just going by what I've observed. As I said, German flirting seems to be it's very dry, and it seems to be almost to the point. I don't want to make any stereotypes here. I mean, I don't know what to say about Canadian or North American dating. I just find there's a superficial aspect about North American culture, and this sort of need to sort of please is still an element there, but also this idea that the man must be everything uber For instance, when I was on a dating site, Match.com, and I just remember one girl, basically her profile said, if you do not earn more than $100,000, do not contact me. I thought, whoa, okay, that doesn't really, help me there. But of course, that stereotype of women only want this.
Yes.
So it's a little embarrassing.
So far, I was quite successful with my strategy of being direct and spoken out. And of course, I felt wounded afterwards.
But this love of Shelley led to a love, which is kind of fascinating. And that's always something that comes up in psychology when I went to therapist, that you're going to find the person you love amongst the things you love doing. If you love mountain bike riding, if you love dancing, if you love skiing, these are places that you're more likely to meet someone because similar interests. I mean, if you're antisocial and there's a social butterfly, it's doubtful that relationship will last, even though they say opposites attract, that there's love there in this arena. I think overall, when you think of a human being that says, hey, I just want to spend a quiet night at home versus someone that says, I really need to be out with people, that relationship's just going to fall apart because the person that's introverted will rather sit at home one-to-one with someone. The extrovert needs to have an audience. I mean, that audience may be the person they love.
Yep, could be.
And then, and especially when it comes to love, that we should start with loving ourselves. That to me is natural. And I think a lot of people are either struggling to do that or not aware of the fact that they need to love themselves. To begin with self-love, I think it's a natural way to go about your life. If you're going to care for someone, start with yourself.
Yes. And I wonder that people buy newspapers or journals, for instance, Love to Love, and their so-called experts tell you what to look for and how to solve your problems. It is so shallow and superficial that it is right and wrong at the same time. So I'd rather have, let's say, interviews, yes, on live than having experts. I can't trust them, to be honest.
We talked about experts before, the idea of you have to be an expert on yourself.
Yes.
I think that's kind of exhibitionism on some people's parts, that they're actually going to put their problem out there into some wider publication. I think they're simply wanting attention, which I wouldn't trust. And if you can't find, I don't know, a person to talk with, to have a dialogue amongst your friends, what does that say about you as a person? I think also there's an element of voyeurism with those columns about love and advice, that it's not so much about really learning about yourself or learning about another human being, but it's just entertainment. It's the same way of watching a romantic comedy. If we watch a romantic comedy, what have we learned? That, men are successful when they stalk women, that if you rush to the airport and commit, to that person at that very moment in desperation, you're going to win that person's heart over. What's another thing romantic comedies teach us? Oh, one little mistake and the relationship is over. I mean, oh God, these movies are just so mind-numbing and yet addictive.
Yes, the last one was important. You get addictive because you also get addictive to it in a relationship. So, for instance, you have a problem in a relationship, you don't feel looked after well. Yep. So, like my mom, honestly, she died the day after we talked about that.
My condolences, mein Beigefühl oder Mitgefühl.
Yes, thank you very much, Rob. And then you really see how family and friends work, who's there for you, who not. And you expect support. And if you don't get it, you are smashed.
Yes, you're destroyed.
And yes, that's right. So that is hard. And it has to do with love. And it's very hard to heal yourself when you feel neglected.
Yes. I can understand that. My mother and I talk about this. She says the idea that when you look at all these institutions, all these people with broken souls, broken lives, all they really needed in the end was just someone to say, I love you, I care for you, I want to help you. I remember when I worked in Victoria, and this was a time when they were trying to cut budgets. So a lot of these institutions, they were letting their patients out, and these people had no social skills. They ended up becoming homeless. And I remember a young man, he would come into the store. I worked at a beer and wine store, and he would steal beer and wine. And we always had to kick him out. Turned out this young boy, he was in his 20s, maybe early 30s. His family was wealthy. And they simply threw him out. They kicked him to the curb because of these disturbances. And in the back of my mind, I remember, just this thinking that all he needed was love. I remember one time I was leaving work and I saw him behind a gas station just crawling up in a sleeping bag. And I thought, that's horrific. Someone's son or someone's daughter could be outside in the cold, the wet cold, suffering just because someone couldn't open their heart. I mean, that's inhuman. And to let that happen, to see that, it really broke my heart seeing that. And I mean, I've had difficulties with, my father over the years, and we've managed to consolidate and our relationship's a lot better. But keeping the door open for love is, for some people, it's a struggle, and I can understand that. But I'd rather keep the door open than shut it.
Mm-hmm. I think people wonder if their partner is a narcissist.
Yeah.
So, or neurotic.
Neurotic, yeah.
And people tend to choose the same partner again and again. So they make the wrong choices their whole life. If not, they question themselves. So what went wrong, etc. So how do you see that somebody only cares for himself, that he is just a poser? Yes. How do you see that in a relationship?
So how do I?
So because these people can be very caring. Mm-hmm. Yes, they give you food, they bring flowers, etc. But they don't let you into their heart. So as long as they are in the center of the universe and they get the full attention of anybody, they think they are happy because they are neurotic. And women fall for these men, and vice versa. There are women who only want power in relationship. So it's very hard to detect that style.
Well, I think those people that are in a relationship that are narcissistic, I think at best they're actors. And I think to be an actor, you have to be a little bit in love with your performance. Mm-hmm. I mean, on the flip side of the Don Juan is the siren call, the idea that Odysseus had to plug up his ears. He still wanted to hear his crew members had to plug up their ears with wax and he had to be tied to the mast to get by them. I mean, he would have thrown himself overboard. And a lot of men do that. Mm-hmm. I've been there. I've fallen for the femme fatale, for the siren, the Salome, the one that will cut off your head and basically serve it on a plate.
Yes.
So
on a platter.
The idea, but I think a lot of things have to be addressed. I think you have to bring the shadow self, for instance, the anima, the animus within the male psyche. There's the female spirit, the anima within the women. There's the animus. I think acknowledging the fragmentation in our lives means acknowledging the kind of people we attract. So if I'm a man if I'm attracted to women, my anima, I have to acknowledge the different women I've been in my life. And that's what I've been doing with my podcast lately. I've been sort of examining these different women I've been attracted to and why I needed to be with them, what drew me to them. And it's because within my own fragmented self, my own lack of self-love, these women represented. They were the physical embodiment of my own self-rejection. So how can I love someone else if I reject myself? And how can that person love me if I'm rejecting myself?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, and people tend to run away. So once they are in conflict, I think the most common type of people just walk out of the room and can't stand the conflict spinning any longer. Yes. So it's very hard to discuss because discussing means a repetition of demands for most people. Yeah. I also tend to reproach the other one and not saying what I wish only and then leave it. So I think we need to change a lot in our styles of relationship.
I agree.
Avoidance is never good. Just being confrontative in a positive way.
Well, I think it's just about reinterpreting something. You have an experience, you want to interpret in a way, and I think we can't interpret things alone. We need another person. We need to be guided by that person. But also, I feel like when love comes into the picture, I feel these aspects of our life are easier. If we have to work hard, if we have to think too hard, I don't know. I just feel like that's not worth it in a relationship. If it's work, yes, there is work in a relationship. There is, I think mostly is work on ourselves, being less selfish, being more, self-aware, aware of the other people. That's fine. But if you have to constantly edit yourself, if you have to constantly wonder what the other person is thinking, and if you have to confuse your devotion with someone with distrust and vice versa, if you distrust that person, you constantly in conflict about how you feel about them, I think those are all signs to leave. But I think culturally, we want to be in love. We love being in love. There's this element too where people are drawn to this whirlwind because, being single, we have such a stigma against that. It's probably worse for women. At a certain age, you should be married, you should have kids, all these sort of checklists, boxes to tick. Guys can still be, I've known people in their 40s and 50s that are still going from relation to relationship. And somehow we just don't question it. We just think, oh, that's just him. But a woman, we were just all of a sudden thinking, oh, what did she do? And that's the horrible double standard. We can't just say, hey, she just enjoys meeting different people. But yet there's this expectation in our culture that your life should be together at a certain age, and then you head into retirement. You have the kids, you go through all these loops, all these little level progressions, you get these little trophies. And I've certainly not at the same time, I see other people that have acquired these so-called societal trophies, and I would never switch places with them. When I'm working at the piano, that's something I love doing. I figure I love what I enjoy in my life. And if I had to be with someone that made me sacrifice that, that's not love. And that's the one thing I've always been afraid of, is meeting that person that would just try to put me like in the Procrustean bed, that whole idea of the mythology of this horrible innkeeper that tortures people. They have to fit in a certain bed. And the relationships I basically dipped my toes into, but, pulled out of, they're all about, right away, I saw the writing on the wall. It was all about them, and I had to fit their mold. And settling, that's my greatest fear, is settling. As a man, maybe I've been more cautious around love and about meeting people because, first of all, I believe that there should be love at first sight, or at least a spark or something there that just says, I have to keep meeting this person. And I haven't felt that in ages, years. I think my adolescence, I felt it more. The last 20 years, no, I can't really think of, a few moments in time where perhaps I was a little in love with a coworker, but that coworker was in a relationship. So maybe it was just a crush.
But at least it was a crush.
Yeah. There was a girl I worked with at a wine store named Leah. And she was fun and spunky, and she was just so finicky about wine bottles on the shelf and organization. On the one hand, she annoyed me so much, but I remember coming to work just preparing just to kind of tell her off. And when I saw her, it's like everything I scripted, everything I thought of saying to her just disappeared. It's like, there she is. How can I be angry at her blue eyes, her red hair? She kind of looked at me as if, you can't get mad at me.
So she was your Beatrice.
A little bit. I really liked her company. I loved her presence because she didn't take people seriously. It was so much fun to watch her interact. For instance, this wine store was this big attraction because it was the largest wine store in Vancouver at the time. They built another bigger one, of course, bigger and bigger. But it had all these wine critics and winemakers come through there. And one time we had this wine critic there. And he was just so demanding and so, I'm so here. You must admire me, la, la, la. And then he was asking, we had this carafe on the table. And he was saying, oh, what's the price of this carafe? I need to find out. This is amazing. And Leah was there, and she said, silly, it's on the carafe. It's right there on the label. As if to say, are you a moron?
But you see, this is a sanguinica, yes? A woman who enjoys life the fullest. But you know that these people tend to be quite super shallow because they are not very deep and not very... the only match they accept. They are nice to everybody, or they are active towards everybody.
That could be.
So this is the disadvantage.
Well,
so
one impression.
So you like the vigilant, the active woman, but sometimes you don't have her for yourself.
Well, one aspect about her that I don't want to say disappointed, but I guess I'll just use that word. It covers all sins. But she was dating a guy that was on the big side. He was a cook. He was a drinker. And she had so many times where she said, I'm leaving work now. I got to go pick up my boyfriend. He's at the restaurant. He's intoxicated. And there were so many times I remember her telling me about this, that she had to put her boyfriend on the couch because he drank too much that night, or she had to make sure that he was still alive. He didn't swallow his tongue, kind of thing. And I thought, how can this lovely girl be with such a wanton idiot, I met the guy and he looked like a slob. And that's the strange thing, that there's some women, you meet them, you think, oh, their boyfriend must be amazing. They must be in love with the most wonderful person. And then you meet the guy, and the same with some guys. You think, oh, he's a good looking fellow. And yet to meet the woman and she's like, wow, okay, it was expectations lower.
So here we go. So when I was negatively in love, I was disappointed. I wrote down that if you have an affair, it is the exchange of neuroticism disguised in sexual trauma. So these two guys then cling to something that is not with themselves. And this girl, you saw in her something that she definitely didn't see in herself, because people disguise. So being very open-minded and very spoken out, this is a disguise for them. So they hide some inner things. And when they choose their partner, this is the partner for their true self-image they have. So their self-respect is not the highest.
No, her animus was this slovenly figure, this figure who gave in to intoxication, drinking, eating. And I know she tried to protect herself from caring for me. I think she was this whole idea of cruel to be kind, because she was going to organize a dinner party and engaging in conversation with me. It's like, oh, we're going to have all these couple friends. And oh, you can come. Do you have a girlfriend? And of course I said no. And then the conversation just dropped, as if, well, I can't continue talking about this discussion with someone I can't invite to this dinner party. And that's what bothered me about that conversation. That sort of gave me an insight. Yes, I have these idealized moments of her, but the ideals wear off. It's like the movie, 500 Days of Summer, where we begin the film by seeing this individual in throes of heartbreak, and he sees only the beautiful moments. But the further we get into the film, we realize that this individual knew right from the beginning this person wasn't right for him. Yet he was so infatuated. It was almost like everything was crystalline, everything was shining in gold, and yet all these little dark spots he just wouldn't acknowledge.
You know that people tend to say that if you love something in the other, it is that what you despise or what you don't acknowledge in yourself. You have something sparkling, very open, very direct in yourself, but you seem to like to hide it. So you seek it in the other.
Okay. You're speaking about me in particular, or just in general, you?
Yes, I speak about you.
Me.
Yes, you, Rob.
Okay. But you're talking about you as in, man. And
No.
Okay.
You. No.
Interesting. My mother always said, don't hide your light under a bushel. And that's very much something I've struggled to do or not to do. But I always feel like I've, for instance, I've been out with friends, and I feel like at the other tables are the women I've been attracted to. I just wonder, how come I'm not sitting at those tables? So is it opportunity, or is it just something I'm putting out there into the universe, something that God is saying, hey, you haven't learned that yet. I'm not going to help you there yet until you learn for yourself, young man.
You need to be cheeky.
Yeah.
You need to be dressed in the correct suit and maybe have a hat on or whatever.
Yeah. Or wear a nice vest.
And then you have to stride into the room and attract the other one's attention. But a clever woman would never fall for that.
Yeah, I think.
She would say, oh, that's a clown.
and vice versa. I mean, I don't want to be attracted. I mean, I like a woman that dresses classy. That I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to talk about Germany again, but where I live here, and
Go
I have
ahead.
to do this. I'm sorry. It's just something I don't know. In other countries, I don't know if this exists, but it's in Germany, not so much Austria, but I call certain women hemp women. They do not seem to care about what they wear. It seems like brown and green, and they go to the Biomarkt, the eco-friendly, the greengrocers. And I just think to myself, I was at a party one time and I couldn't tell if the person that walked in the door was a man or woman because it was so asexual, so ambiguous. And you're laughing, but this is something I see and it drives me nuts. Like, okay, I don't expect a woman to wear like gollops of makeup, her whole face exploding with rouge. But it's just... And sometimes
it is natural beauty.
I mean, I have friends who are naturally beautiful. Friday evening I was with a friend and she doesn't need makeup. I mean, she still wears nice clothing. It's not like she's like capitalistic and, oh, you bad people, and you're killing the seals, and I don't know, the whales are dying because you're wearing this clothing.
But you know what? Oh no, I'm not allowed to say it here, but I come from the East, yes? So you have heard about nudism in the East?
I love that. I think that's so natural. That's lovely. I go to the beach and do the FKK, the Freie Körperkultur.
Well, no,
lovely.
I no longer, but it was natural in all these years. So people tend to think that it is more important to like your body than what you have over it.
I agree. I mean, I think the whole idea in the DDR, the GDR time, I've been told that this nudism was all about freedom from the state because the clothing represented the state. And when you were naked, you were free of that.
I don't believe that.
Okay, this is something I heard. So maybe it was just an outsider perspective looking in and therefore trying to...
We didn't have the swimming suits. Yes, it was a shortage of everything. So we adapted, I would say. It was just practical.
But I think there's like this beautiful eroticism in nudism. I mean, it's both earthy and practical at the same time. And yet there's an eroticism about that. I mean, the female figure is beautiful. I love what Mircea Eliade, the Romanian, said. It says, when a woman is naked, she is the universe embodied. I mean, she is creativity.
Yes, that's very romantic. I like that.
And I totally agree. I think a woman's body represents such power.
So let me come to a last topic, okay? So let's talk about online dating.
Oh, God, no luck there.
Oh, yes, I knew that you would come with that. But I want to remind you that online dating, in my opinion, is the most honest meeting of people at an older age who don't have to disguise, because either they are old or older, or they have children to care for, and everything is known by the other one. The only negative thing I see is that people can't get punished if they lie, if they make themselves younger, if they make false compliments, etc. But the opportunity to meet is very effective and can be very truthful.
Are you speaking from experience is my question.
I speak from experience with friends who are now married and met on online dating platforms.
Well, I've only had negative experiences, and I attribute this, I would call this individual, this entity, I call it the obstructing angel. Something has hindered me, something has stood in my way, because I have tried online dating numerous times, and something always happened. Not so much in my power, otherwise it might have been in my power. For instance, I first started using, what was the site called? eHarmony. eHarmony is very famous site, and it's basically Christian values. That's the main fundamental value aspect. but they stagger the questions. That was the difficult thing, is that you would send a question, you get a response, and it would just take forever.
Mm-hmm.
And I finally met someone, but at the time I was living in British Columbia and I was on the verge of moving. And she looked adorable and we were hitting it off. We were writing back and forth. So I had to break the news to her. I says, I'm sorry, but I'm moving. So we never actually met, but we had nice emails. That was the closest. Then I tried Match.com.
But you know,
it didn't work.
A reminder. I mean, I think you were too soon in the saying goodbye. You could have said something like, everything takes time and it took such a long time so that we two meet. So just let each other decide. Everybody has the chance to decide. But for the moment, I really enjoy every minute I spend with you online.
I feel the same. Again, I love what we're doing. Again, coming back to love, I have a passion for working on my podcast, for working on this one. I pray that it continues to be successful and we have these really engaging conversations. To me, when you're doing something you love, time flies. So, and I feel the same way. I hope we can continue working on this for sure.
Yeah. What will be our next topic?
I think we should talk about home, because if we're going to talk from when we started about expert in your life, on the flip side of that was death, and now we've come to love. Well, to me, love is a sense of home. You know, in Shakespeare, the idea of that the ending of something is in lover's arms. So we have this connotation of falling in love is coming home.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and being home is something that we have to do at the moment in times like these. So I think a sense of belonging and feeling at home is very important, and I'd love to talk about that with you.
Yeah, I would love the same as well. And I think home is a very fascinating topic because it has, like love, has all these different layers and levels to it. But in closing, I would like to share, because you began a little chat today with some reading. And it was very interesting that you talked about approaching wave, and it's in this poem that I've translated. It's by Rilke. And I know you're not the biggest fan of Rilke, but this poem, I don't know, embodies a lot of how I feel about love. And so I would like to read it in closing. So it's, the German is im voraus, so du im voraus, so you just ahead. So it's a very difficult poem to translate. So I translate it as you a little beyond. So this is the poem. You a little beyond, beloved, long lost, never to arrive. I live not knowing the songs you love, given up my search for you in the approaching wave of the nearing moment. Still these images in me, landscapes ever broadening with unsuspecting turns in the path. Cities, towers, bridges, and the lands with their gods intermingling. Forever trembling, all rise up with this one meaning. You, my elusive one. Ah, you're the gardens I looked upon wistful with such hope. An open window, yes, and a country house, and you ever pensive. Nearly stepped out as if only for me. Streets I found myself in, you had been there in passing. And sometimes the windowed mirrors of the merchant shops, joyfully spinning from your reflection, became startled all at once due to mine. Who knows whether the same bird sang through us yesterday, alone in the evening.
Nice.
That's one of my favorite poems.
Sad.
Because as I said, 14, that was the time I fell in love. And ever since then, I always feel like the person I must be in love with in my life is either behind me or ahead of me.
Okay, so I'm curious to see how it all goes on with you.
Well, we never know.
Wish you the big love.
I mean,
will come around.
Hopefully. On the one hand, it's very strange that we just talked about death and your mother's passing. I mean, that's so sad and so sudden. At the same time, I'm thinking we just talked about love. Well, maybe one of us will fall in love.
Don't say it. No.
Okay, I take it back.
You never say what will. Yeah.
I'll take it back then.
So see you next week,
See
Rob.
you next week, and we will have a lovely chat about home. Home sweet home.
Yeah. Looking forward
All the best,
to it.
Dolly. Thank you very
Bye.
much. Bye.